Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Iceberg Theory podcast, where we go beneath the surface. Today, we're going to talk about a very critical function of any organization, which is highly misunderstood, which is the HR. It's usually looked as a police in an organization or somebody who's behind processes and the adherence. However, there's so much beneath this function that is rarely spoken about. And that's exactly we are going to dive into today. To take this conversation deeper, help us understand the human behind the HR, we have with us Rushabh Mota. Rushabh is the founder of Talent Edge Consulting, a fractional CHRO, a HR strategist, and an executive coach. Rushabh brings with him an ocean of experience when it comes to HR. He's not just worked in the HR function himself, but also set up HR fundamentals for many organizations. So, to take this conversation deeper, to understand the human behind the HR, we welcome Rishabh to the Iceberg Theory podcast.
Thank you, Neetu. Thank you for the welcome.
So, before we go into the human behind the HR, we'll first start with you. You worked with multiple organizations in the space of HR. So, beyond the role of either a CHRO or an HR strategist, beyond that title, who are you in that role?
All right. Before that, before I get into my role, I think it's important to also talk about the history of how the role has evolved, I think before 1990s, HR was more of a personal administrator kind of a role with heavy emphasis on ensuring that the people are comfortable, right? Uh, Post 1990s, there has been a wave where HR has been transitioning, continues to transition into becoming strategic business partner. And when I talk about being a strategic business partner, basically the focus is to get a seat on the table. You know,
Sure.
um, the unfortunate part is that the focus is to get a seat on the table without really understanding the business. And I think that's where the challenge of an HR leader continues to persist, where they're still being perceived as a personal administrator to a greater
Yeah.
extent, right? Um, I think, and now with with AI coming into picture, and how things are getting streamlined, I think the increasingly the HR leaders will not just have to be strategic business partners, but they also need to focus on creating meaningful employee experiences because retention is going to be of the most paramount importance. And now there are calculations around how the cost of retention versus the cost of hiring a replacement and etc. So now increasingly people are realizing this, and that's where HR plays a very big role. So yeah, I mean that's how I see the transition of HR from being a just a personal administrator kind of a professional to becoming true business partners.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point that you made because when we look at HR as a function, usually the way it's looked at, I'll tell you my experiences. It's always been that, that one function that you meet on the day one that you join a company
Yeah.
and the day you leave in your exit interview. And every time your appraisal happens or, any policy change happens, that's the conversations we end up having with HR and about HR.
Yeah.
So HR, in a way, sometimes gets into the space of being one of the most discussed function
Yeah.
within the employees, but not for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And when you mention that shift between how it was in the early 90s to where you see the HR should be moving now, I think that's a good insight for anybody who also wants to understand what HR as a function has the capacity to do.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we'll start with the first part where, it's one of the most hated departments in any organization. Why
Yeah.
do you think HR ends up becoming that?
Uh, Again, I have a theory for that because I've been on the other side where I've also been hated. Uh, what happens is HR is, for the lack of better word, HR plays a dual nature. On one side, you are expected to know what the people on the ground or what the voice on the ground is. And on the other hand, because of the transition to becoming strategic partners, you're also expected to understand the business output.
Yeah.
Now, you might know a lot of things here which you cannot share here with the
Mhm.
executives, and you might know a lot of things here which you cannot share with the employees. And then invariably, the thing that happens is whatever decision, or whatever enforcement or whatever, not enforcement per se, but whatever policy or process or whatever change you're trying to bring about in the organization, you probably are not able to communicate in the right way to the right last mile, and whatever you try and communicate, it's more often than not open to interpretation.
True.
And I like to call this that for people who actually hate HR, it's more often than not how they look at HR as, their distant parents, um, with whom they probably have had some unresolved issues, you know,
Wow.
and it's so easy for them to just take it out on the HR, right?
Mm.
So that's where I feel that the role is so complex. It's
Mm.
not a very straightforward this is in the policy, so yes and no, etc. It's all about understanding individual nuances. But as an individual, it's not possible. Let's say if you're managing 500, 600 employees as an HR business partner, or as an HR leader, let's say 1,500, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, whatever number of employees, it's impractically impossible to understand nuances of each individual and what he or she is going through.
Yeah.
So you can never cater to everyone, and that's where you will always find people who will hate HR.
Yeah.
Now, because of that, it has become such a common norm, that people just the easiest way to vent it out is to an HR, and then you
Mhm.
expect the HR to be a superhero who can absorb all the hate, all the toxicity, all the negative emotion, and still come out to become like, still stay to the guardrails that have been defined by the organization and
Mm.
still get hated.
Yeah.
It's unfair, but unfortunately, it is how it is. So
Yeah.
whatever is getting discussed at the top, more often than not, HR is the executioner of it, right?
Yeah.
And when that happens, invariably the leadership, the executives, or the leader of a particular business, because they need to ensure that their rapport with, they need to be the good cop with their own team, right? And
Yeah.
that's where the bad cop is us.
Yeah.
So it's actually very nuanced to organizations. Certain organizations managers are matured enough to drive that message to the last mile. Certain organizations managers are not matured enough, and that's where you have to step in as an HR
Yeah.
professional. So we have to, as an HR professional, you have to always be prepared to be hated
Mm.
because it's very subjective. You don't have a direct KPI to tell or correlate it with the policy and then tell that, okay, what, this is what we are implementing. Or some individual comes with some venting out against the manager, peer, the feeling of unfairness, etc. Could be anything. And the
Yeah.
person will come to you, I come to, let's say, us as an HR
Mm.
professional and say the worst of the worst things, and then still invariably move out of the room feeling that, okay, this HR is useless.
True.
But then if you think deeper, it's actually the unresolved issues that they are themselves trying to grapple with. And this is very important for HR leaders to understand. The
Mm.
level of maturity that is expected from an HR professional, this is where it peaks. because you need
Mm.
to be empathetic towards yourself, towards the other person, dissociate yourself as a professional from that person's situation and from the
Yeah.
situation that you're managing, right? And come out unscathed. It's one of the toughest jobs to do. Plus, it's a thankless job. So there are so many nuances and elements that people don't understand about HR professionals. And that's something that um, I don't think people will ever understand. This is how it's going to be. And that's
Yeah,
also where HR professionals, because they go through so much, invariably they also somewhere down the line tend to let go of their own ability to empathize.
true. And it's alarming to hear this because, when you mention about this, the one thing that comes to my mind is, uh, HR probably is one of the only functions for which nobody has empathy,
Yeah,
because like you said, they become the face of the policy. Like they are the ones who are gonna come and come and talk to you about any of the changes, drive them on the floor, whatever conversations that happen, the hard conversation, HR becomes the face of it. So that lack of empathy, increased misunderstanding, I
yeah,
think this kind of leads, and I can only imagine the amount of pressure it puts on HR leaders because, you know, handling it right from the front and yet trying to stay objective without really getting affected.
yeah.
How do you think HR leaders manage to do this?
Increasingly, they are realizing, they're becoming aware of the need to manage. But still, if you look at certain surveys, 98% of HR leaders feel that they are burnt out already. More than 90% of them post COVID, they've started to feel that they are overwhelmed because they're always on. Something or the other keeps happening. And what
Yeah,
happens is, as executives or as business leaders, they always keep coming up with new initiatives that they want to drive. And as an HR professional, when you're looking at it from a bigger lens,
yeah,
and by bigger lens, I mean not just focusing on the business, but also on the people, because
yeah,
whatever decisions business executives take, it is going to affect the people who are going to execute it. And
yeah,
when that happens, so and that constantly happens because we are moving in a fast-paced world, and now with AI coming in, I'm sure organizations are wanting to upskill, they are wanting to pivot. So the pace of change is growing so much that every time there is some new initiative, there is some new requirement, there is massive hiring, and then there's suddenly firing that's happening. So there are
yeah,
too many elements that are coming in play. And because of that, HR leaders are always on. They have to be on. They
yeah,
have to be able to look at it from a people point of view, understand the business point of view, and then recommend a solution. If it doesn't work, if it's not enough, if it's not fructified well, then it's
yeah,
important for the HR leader to push back as well. You know,
yeah.
so it's an ongoing battle that HR professionals are going through. And the thing is, now HR leaders are realizing this, that all of us have finite energy,
Yes,
right? And if you are taking energy of other people by in form of toxicity, negative energy, venting out, whatever it may be, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, you also need to figure out how to replenish your own energy.
yeah,
Yeah. And that's very important. And if you don't do it, there are instances where uh, over a period of time, I've seen people go through, health issues because all these negative energy, they play within your body. People don't realize this. Your well-being is not just about your physical well-being. Your well-being is a lot more than that. It's about your mental well-being, your spiritual well-being, your emotional well-being, the energy that you're living with. All of that is important, you know so that's something that people need to understand, and they're not understanding that right now. So I think whenever that happens, you need to be able to take that pause.
yeah,
Right? Second thing, as HR professionals, we've been told, we've been groomed, or we've grown up with, is being someone who needs to be a problem solver,
Mm.
right? When I talk about being a problem solver, uh, you are expected to take care of other problems, other people's problems, you know. And when there are moments when you don't want to do that, I mean, you're being conscious of the fact that maybe it's not your problem to solve, there is an element of guilt also that comes into picture, because that's how we've perceived the role to be. There is this constant tussle that, you don't want to take care of this, but you also feel guilty that you're not taking care of it. If you don't deal with it appropriately, that also can lead to, energy depletion and all of that. So it's very, very important to have a hobby. You need to have your time off work and not feel guilty about it, and do follow your passion to, whatever gives you energy, keep doing that. I think that would be my mantra to deal with it.
Those are some great insights, Rishabh. I think it's not just for anybody who's wanting to understand about, the struggles of a HR function, but, any of the HR managers who are listening to this, I think more than half of them would, jump to the tips that you've given that, yes, this is what probably I need because, the pointers that you mentioned about the struggles that happen behind the scene, managing everything, their own emotions, their own, the empathy for self and the empathy for others. And all of these are such, intricate part of, I think, a human existence as well, that how you manage your own emotions versus, the people that you are working with. And you end up somewhere feeling the responsibility of not being fair sometimes. And that's one of the things that comes up, the word fairness,
Yeah. Yeah.
often comes up with HR that HR is not fair.
Yeah.
This is not fair. HR can't do it.
Yeah.
And, that aspect of fairness is so often discussed, whether it's in a cafeteria, somebody sitting and talking about, what the HR shared with them, or
Yeah.
when it comes to, your appraisals, your pay hikes, or any major change that happens. The first
Yeah.
thing that goes out, HR is not fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
So taking this fairness aspect, and I know you touched upon this, that, what should a HR manager do to keep their own calm, because they're as much an employee as the person they are dealing with. So there's not much within their control, but how do they manage this fairness aspect? So how should HR leaders work on this fairness aspect?
Yeah. This is a very honestly a very touchy topic, because um, my definition of fairness has evolved over time, Netu. I would like to believe that I am one of the most fair people in this world. Okay, because it's my number one value and I live by
Hmm.
it. But what I've also come to a realization that fairness is extremely subjective. You know,
True.
for me, fairness is living within the guardrails of process, ensuring that, from let's look at an appraisal case study, ensuring that, someone who is supposed to, who has spent more than 3 years in a role from a career progression standpoint, is he or she not ready for the next role? Then discuss it with the manager, give them a recommendation, etc. On the other hand, someone who has high potential and has showcased results and is ready for the next level. So, and the third case is someone who's been a veteran in the company but has not been
Hmm.
performing to the level that he or she is expected to perform. Right now, as an HR, it's not a very mathematical calculation.
Yeah.
It's not a very simple calculation that, okay, 3 years, your past 3 years ratings have been top ratings. So this year you should be promoted. No, it doesn't work like that. You know, it's a largely an element of the perception that the person has created about himself or herself, the perception that the leader who is a deciding authority
Hmm.
in promoting someone, what is the perception that he or she has created about this person, right? So invariably, I have come to a realization that there will be 5 to 7% of the population who will never be happy with the outcome.
Yes.
Okay. For two reasons. One, probably their perception is bad, but their work is good and they have not gotten the requisite increment, appraisal, etc. Second, there are, and second kind of people are a lot many where they overestimate what they have done, but
Yeah.
they've actually not done enough. And here's where
Mhm.
the managers are equally at fault because
Yeah.
managers, in the pursuit of getting job done from these people, they've never been candid in giving them the right feedback.
Yeah.
Right? If they feel someone's not doing okay, then tell that person they are not doing okay. But managers are not trained to be candid, radically candid with people in terms of giving feedback and people feeling that, okay, they genuinely mean feedback for their own good, you know? So I think, yeah, so these are the elements. And then what happens is there's a concept called procedural justice,
Okay.
right? The maximum that an HR professional can do is create that perception of having a fair process
Mm.
and doing what is required to come to a logical conclusion of who is ready and who is not, right?
Yeah.
Even after doing that, um, you will still feel people are not feeling that element of justice, that fair,
Mm.
the right decision has been taken. Then what do you do about it? So that's also some place where HR can play a role, where
Mm.
the person who is aspiring to, let's say, move to the next level or aspiring a big hike, have a conversation with that person in line with the manager, decide on the common outcome for the next 6 months. Because more often than not, now companies are having dual cycle of appraisal. Like
Mm.
one appraisal is usually in the month of April or September or whatever, depending on the appraisal cycle year is. But 6 months down the line, in order to retain people, they do have one more round of cycle. Of course, it largely depends on the business priorities and everything, but more often than not, they do. Now, in those 6 months, have a very clear KPI in terms of what needs to be delivered, and person needs to every month, without fail, give a response which is
Mm.
in line with the role that he or she wants to do. So this is an
Yeah.
element of creating fairness, that okay, you've been heard.
Mm.
If you think you're ready for the next role, it's not coming right now because yeah, there is a limit in terms of the number of promotions and appraisals that you can give. But
Yeah.
yeah, 6 months down the line, why don't you prove that you are ready for that role? It should
Yeah.
unanimously come through that you are ready for the role.
Mm.
And this is what you need to do. And that's where there is an element where HR professionals need to understand business really well.
Mm.
Because there's a possibility the manager might have some certain biases against this individual, but this individual is actually good, you know.
Yeah.
And then if you let managers steer that conversation in terms of what is it that the person is expected to deliver in the next 6 months, then there's a possibility that this might not work. You might lose a good candidate.
Mm. True.
So if you understand the business and know when a manager is bluffing and a manager is genuinely giving a task,
Mm.
it will create an element of fairness or a perceived fairness in the
Mm.
individual, and you will see better output coming out of them,
Yeah.
right? And this kind of element has to be in all processes, even in recruitment. Let's say if
Mm.
you, of course, as a recruiter, you cannot exactly tell why a person is rejected, right? But you can at least tell them broadly that you have decided to fill some position internally. And when you communicate that with the external candidate, you will see that the person is going to, the chances of that person applying for a role is likely to be 2x,
Mm.
and that holds true for all processes in HR,
Sure.
right? Third thing, and that's something that I have personally, I believe in it a lot, is creating that element of trust.
Mm.
Usually, as an HR professional, you're between executives and employees, right? executives have certain perceptions, certain ideas, certain notions, certain ways of doing work, certain priorities, which people on the bottom might not know. People on the
Yeah.
bottom might have their own challenges, which people at the top will not know.
Yeah.
So, how are you connected with the roots, which is the people who are in the bottom, the frontline workforce? How are you connecting with them? How are you able to absorb everything, link it
Mm.
back to the business strategy that the executives are wanting to drive, and then communicate the best practices that needs to be driven
Mm.
and manage change around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that way you're listening to both. You know, the executives also feel heard, and
Mm.
they will give you a seat on the table, and people on the bottom also realize that, okay, he's there, he or she is there, and is actually trying to solve what's important or what can make their job better.
Yeah.
Don't solve their problems, don't solve individual problems, solve what is going to help them become better in the job, or what can help them make their job better. So these are certain elements that can help in dealing with fairness.
Yeah, yeah. You actually gave us so much to know about HR, to be very honest with you, because as you were speaking, the three layers that stood out to me. The first one is, the fairness aspect when it comes to performance, right? And performance, like you said, is not performance appraisals or promotions are not always straightforward. The aspect of performance versus potential always is something that drives the decision around the promotions or the hikes or anything that is more beneficial to the employee. So that's
Yeah.
one element which again is something where HR is looked as unfair. The second
Mhm.
element is where you said you're dealing with maybe managers whom you don't know if they are actually being fair or biased or have a certain agenda at the back of their mind. And because HR professionals are HR professionals, they are not psychologists to understand that on the face of it. It takes a lot to go deeper into that, understand, is this something reflecting as unfair on HR? The
Yeah.
third layer that you mentioned was the top organization and at the bottom level. So bringing all of these together, so
Yeah.
if the HR talks more on behalf of the people, then they're looked as an unfair HR because you're not working for the organization, you're driving everything for the people. And
Yeah.
if everything is brought from top down and HR shares it with the people, then the element of unfairness that you're not fair, you're not listening to us, you're not sharing what we need. So from what I understand, one or the element would always be in imbalance for an HR professional, that would put them into the unfair bucket.
Unfair bucket, hated bucket will always be the case. Always. Because it's a balance which invariably you will continue to tilt. You will never have that balance. You will never have a uniformity. You will always have something or the other tilting in one direction or the other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot of insight about HR. I don't think many people really think about HR. For the multiple layers that they handle.
Yeah.
Now let's go into your experience, Rishabh. Knowing this aspect of HR, and you yourself have been into the appraisal cycles, a victim or a participant in everything that happens around in an organization.
Yeah.
Um, is there anything personally you felt that you would like to share? Anything that affected you?
Yeah. I mean, in fact, I have also had bad appraisal cycles. Uh,
Mm,
Sometimes you feel there was no reason. You felt, you yourself, like, I myself felt victimized that, okay, I've done everything. I've been communicating what needs to be communicated, but my manager felt that, okay, you've not done enough, you know. Um, so during that whole process, the most important thing is to also under manage your own emotions, because your appraisal happens at the same time that people that you're responsible for are going through the cycle, right?
yeah.
So my belief is, and I think I have gotten matured to deal with it. I've had two bad appraisal cycles over 10 years that I was working. In
Mm,
one cycle, the moment I got to know I felt betrayed and I left immediately and I went home. The second appraisal cycle, um, I felt hurt, of course, that okay, how this, on what basis? Because I was not given a proper rationale around it. Even in the first, I was not given a clear rationale. I came in, I absorbed it. I just spent, 30 minutes absorbing what was communicated to me. But I also realized that my role is to be responsible for a larger audience, right? And there is an important process to be closed. So what I usually believe and what I do is immediately after certain things that happen, I look at it in two buckets. Number one, is there anything that I can do about it?
Mm.
If yes, then do that.
Yeah.
If no, then just let go because it's harming me more than anyone else. It's not
Well said.
easy. I'm not saying it's easy and you need to do it. And you can do it like just like that. It requires a lot of introspection that you need to have it within yourself.
Mm.
Um, and also shed the thinking that okay, if others get to know that this is the increment percentage that I've got, which
Mm.
unfortunately everyone gets to know somehow.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like an open secret. Of course, it depends on company to company, but largely I've seen people get to know. Then what will be my image in their eyes? So we tend to overthink
Mm.
all of that without really focusing on the problem, without really focusing on the core issue, right?
Mm.
So I have come out of that worry about what others are going to think. I tend to focus inwards, try to look
Mm.
at what I can do about this. If I can do something about this, then I do that. And if I can't do anything about it, then I just, let it go. I just accept it as what it is and I let it go. If you look at your career, it's more like a marathon, right? It's not a sprint. And in marathon, you will have your ups and downs,
Yes.
right? But what's most important is in your downs, can you really learn can you really learn what you could have done better? Because
Mm.
invariably you will realize few months down the line that you could have done something better. And in both
True.
those instances, I realized what I could have done better.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's about communicating better, ensuring that you're having those tough conversations. You're asking your manager to push you, all of those things. We like to work at our own convenience,
Mm.
and that when it doesn't work in our favor, we feel hurt.
Yeah.
you know and that is more often than not true for people, because people have their strengths and weaknesses. Then those weaknesses could be about confrontation, could be about managing anxiety, could be about doing what's required to be done, by managing your own emotion, and they are not able to do that. And then they
Mm.
expect someone else to understand that about yourself and give
Yeah.
you clean chit and recommend you or give you a promotion or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's not how the real world works, right? So I think that's how I have looked at the whole situation, and that's how I look at it now also.
Mm.
Right now I don't have any appraisal, but if I have to design a process around it, my primary conversation with any manager or with the person who is driving that is to create an element where people really understand why they have gotten what they have gotten.
Yeah.
And it cannot be like a year end process. It has to be a throughout the year process. And of
Yes.
course, I'm not saying that this will completely eliminate,
Mm.
those tough situations, but at least it will minimize it.
Yes.
And this level of understanding is very important. I think this only comes with your ups and lows and how you have stood in those moments. What kind of learnings have you been able to pick up from there?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that's been my experience, Neetu.
That those are some great experiences. Rishabh, because when it comes from a HR, from somebody who's been into HR for a long space, and say that how do you handle such situations? What can you do? And those
Yeah.
are some great insights as well for anybody who wants to understand how to work through those lows, right? And so thank you for sharing that. Now, working in this HR leadership space, you've dealt with so many people.
Yeah.
What is something HR leadership taught you about human nature?
Human nature. All right. First, I think in the role that you are bound to be lonely. Okay. I'm talking from an human behind the HR, like the professional. So, as
Sure.
an HR leader, I have come to a realization that my job is lonely, right? Because I can't share openly what I feel.
Mm,
I know a lot about individuals who have shared their secrets, insecurities, anxieties, whatever is happening in their personal life, positive, negative, everything with me. And then there are executives who are sharing the business approach, what's the future looking like, what is going to happen, etc. And I need to be able to hold both of it without leaking anything to anyone.
yeah.
You can only release certain elements of information
Yeah.
which are required for the effective working of the organization,
Mm,
right? So I think that's where I feel the human element, the HR is always going to be a lonely and a thankless
mm,
profession. Having said that, on the other hand, you are expected to be empathetic towards people. You are expected to understand the emotions of others, and ensure that the workspaces, um, the experiences are really good for people, right? So yeah, I mean, when you look at this aspect, you realize that people who are talking to you are invariably coming, good or bad, are invariably coming to talk to you out of some expectations that they have.
yeah.
At the end of the day, every conversation becomes like a transaction.
Mm,
And how you deal with that transaction is very important. So that's why you need to have an element of understanding what each individual's strengths are, what each individual's aspirations are, what each individual's opportunity areas are, and
yeah.
be able to communicate in line with all these three areas combined, and also have the person feel that okay, the person is invested in my growth,
Mm,
right? I think that's been my basic understanding and learning about human psychology. Second is when you offer something to people without any expectation, only and purely from an expectation to do good by them, you will see multifold returns always.
yes.
Will see people really give back to you multifold. At the end of
True.
the day, the any transaction or any relationship being between HR and employee, HR or executive, you will always see that it's going to be a give and take. Unfortunately, HR is always massively on the giver side.
Mm,
They don't get for
yeah.
the quantum of effort that they are putting, right? So realize that about yourself. Take what is required for you, either from people around in the office or from avenues that you think are more suitable for you to receive that
Mm,
satisfaction. When you're balanced that way, because you're going to give away a lot,
yes.
that's when you will be able to balance your empathy.
Yeah.
And that's where exploitation that usually people see or feel is because their energies are imbalanced, or the way they are operating is imbalanced. They feel like giving so much to work without, and then expect the organization or people to just also give you in return to on the same
Mm.
level.
Yeah.
That doesn't work, unfortunately. It may work for some people, it may not work for some people, because it's again a very subjective game. If I feel I've given 100x, but if my manager feels it's only 10x, then you'll only get 10x, because you've not communicated the value of 100x to the manager in a way that he or she understands.
True.
So perception becomes such an important role,
Yeah.
that just doing the work is not important.
Mm.
Being able to sell your work is very important.
Yeah.
And not feeling guilty that you're selling your work is doubly more important. Because invariably, people who are doers, who are really good at doing work, they feel like they would want the work to do the talking. It doesn't work always.
True.
Right? So that's the third learning, that about human behavior, that um, be willing to sell your work unabashedly. And
Mm.
people who do that are usually more rewarded than others. The unfortunate part right now in today's world is people are more talkers and less doers. And the
Yeah.
talkers, they get more attention.
Yes.
And the doers, they get less attention. So if, as a leader, it's very, very important to be able to recognize those doers as well,
Mm.
and maybe give them the tools to become a talker as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's important, that you cannot just let your work do the talking, because it doesn't work that way. The
Yeah.
more you talk, the more you sell, the more people will realize the value that you can bring to the table. Yeah.
Very true. Very true. I think you touched on quite a lot of things, and everything that you spoke about, Rishabh, not just helps a HR professional, but also anybody who is aspiring to be an HR professional to understand what are the layers beneath this, function that are not known.
Yeah.
Because when you look at, young professionals who are just out of, their MBAs and wanting to get into companies and become HR managers and things like that, they probably don't understand what goes beneath this role. And I think
Yeah.
everything that you shared today helps not just the HR professional, not just the aspirants, but also people who misunderstand HR as a function. There's so much insight that you've shared, and thank you so much for all the pieces of information that you've shared from every aspect of HR. And this was an absolutely delightful discussion for us. We loved every bit of the conversation today, and I'm so glad we had this discussion, because it's often the empathy part missing for HR, the understanding part missing for HR, and people who drive this from the front actually don't receive it back from people on in the business. So thank you so much for sharing the insights, and any last piece of advice, insight, or information about HR that you want to share with our listeners today.
Yeah, I think one thing that I would definitely want people, any aspiring HR professional, to take away from here is, and remember, is number one, HR doesn't mean that if you're good at talking with people, you are a good HR. It doesn't work like that. Of course, it's a good skill to have, but HR is much more than that. So please do not take up a course in HR, or get into the industry with your first role with that perception. So please do not do that. Second, every HR professional, if you really want a seat on the table, if you really want to create an impact, understand your business, understand the business that you're operating in, right? If you have worked, let's say, in a FMCG company, and then you're coming into a tech company and you're trying to implement same ideas that you had implemented in FMCG or you learned in FMCG, it will not work.
Yeah.
Every industry, every company has their own modus operandi, the way of working. Please
Mm.
understand that before you get into the solutioning or the execution mode.
Yeah.
Because or else you will just go around the loop and end nowhere. So that these are going to be my two advices to people who are wanting to be in HR profession or are HR
Amazing.
professionals.
Yeah, those are great advices, and I think uh, it's not just beneficial to know more about HR, but also go deeper into the whole aspect of what happens behind this function and the challenges the function faces. So thank you once again, Rishabh. It was a pleasure to have you with us on the show today.
Likewise, Neetu, it's been a long time pending, but so glad we were able to have this
Yes,
conversation.
thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.